Let me welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host. I'm the forum's creator and chief cat herder. I'm delighted to see you all here today. We have a very, very special guest. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Before we enter that, let me introduce the program and explain how it came about, how it works, and what we hope to accomplish. So to begin with, you should know that the forum is a conversation-based place. This is where we have discussion, largely face-to-face. We are not about presentation. This slide that's here for a second, I'm going to get rid of it really in just a couple of seconds. I just want to emphasize that this is all about conversation, not about presentation. And it's spun out of an ongoing research effort called the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report, or FTTE. And that's an ongoing monthly trends analysis that looks at the major forces shaping education and technology. If you haven't seen it, go to ftte.us. You can download a few sample issues and subscribe if you like. Now, both the forum and the FTTE report are part of a broader project called the Future of Education Observatory. And this is a continuous, multimedia, participatory, open effort to try to grapple with the future of education and technology. It includes this forum, it includes the FTTE report, it includes a blog, a book club, a bookstore, and something new coming up in just a little while. So if you haven't seen that, go to futureofeducation.us and you can learn more. Now, we can only do this work with the help of people who support us, and we want to thank them and recognize them before we proceed. So to begin with, let me thank NYSERNet from New York State. That's non-for-profit that helps that state's colleges and universities get on broadband internet and do great things with each other. They also do research and professional development, and I'm just in awe of what they accomplish. I'm really grateful to them for their support. I'm also grateful to Shindig because, as you can tell, Shindig makes available the technology we're using right now. So let me explain if you're new to it or if you haven't been here for a while. Where I am right now, and where this slide is just for a minute, is called the stage. And we call it the stage because everybody can see or hear whatever goes on up here. And you can join us. I'll show you how to do that. Right below us is the participant swarm, or the group of people formerly known as the audience. That's you. If you look around, you'll see individual people represented either by a video feed, so there's Roxanne smiling, or a photo, there's a shot of Steve Cavello, or a silhouette like Brenda. And each of those is usually one person, sometimes several people piled together from a single location. And if you watch, you'll see that all their icons move back and forth a bit as they connect and think and adjust things as we go. If you'd like to talk to one of those individuals, simply double click on their icon. And if they want to talk to you when their technology is on, your two icons will snap together like Legos. You can have your own private audio visual bubble. Now, if you want to talk to all of us, if you want to share your thoughts with our guest and with me, there are three ways. And I'm going to point you to them right now. Look at the bottom of your screen. There's a white strip that runs along right across the bottom. And there are three key buttons for you to know. The leftmost edge, there's a number with a little tiny human head silhouettes. The number is 41, now 42. That's the number of people involved in this conversation. If you click on that, up will pop two boxes. Box on your left will be a film strip view showing you all the participants, and you can mouse over them to learn more. And on the right is a chat box, which is a pretty handy thing. The chat box lets you just have conversations with people who are joining in with you. In fact, we break these boxes into groups of about 19 or 20. So as you come in, you can see different chat box rooms and you can move between them. But the chat box is a good informal place to bash around ideas, float questions, quickly share URLs or jokes as they come up. And that's a pretty good way to communicate with people. One word of caution, right now today, I can't see those chat boxes, just the way I have this configured. So if you want to get my attention, let me show you two other ways. Back to that white strip. Next to the number, which is now 46 and rising, you'll see a question mark with a circle around it. If you click that, up will pop a box that will let you type in a question or a comment. And I receive that, and then I can flash that on the screen for everyone to see, and I can read it out loud for everyone to hear. And that's a really good thing to do if your connection isn't that great or if you're not in a place where you can talk on video. And we find people like to share questions that way. Now, back to that white strip. If you see the button with a raised hand, That means that if your microphone is working and your camera is working and you're in a physical environment where you can speak freely and listen, then you can join us on stage. Click the raised hand icon, we'll get that, and as soon as we can, we'll beam you up here on stage. In fact, up here on stage, we can have up to 4 people at once. So me, a guest, and 2 of you. Yeah, think of it as a kind of pop-up panel or your own DIY panel as we go. So that's the best way. That gives you the most emotional as well as literal bandwidth. And it's a great way to engage. If you haven't experienced it before, don't worry. I'll walk you all through it and I'll show you how it works, but it's really, really nifty. And if that's not enough for interaction, head over to Twitter and just use the hashtag FTTE. And you'll see already there we have our guest and several different people who've already been saying hello. So thank you to Clau and thank you to Shelby. Um, I'll be tracking that as we go, and I'll try and work in individual tweets. So we're really grateful to Shindig for making this technology available. I want to thank one other wonderful source of people who support us. I want to thank our supporters and friends on Patreon. If you haven't seen Patreon, it's a crowdfunding site like GoFundMe or Kickstarter, and lots of people join together to support someone making stuff. In this case, it's us making this stuff about the future of education and technology. People can kick in as little as $1 a month just to keep the lights on and the machines humming. And you'll see here on this graph that we have all kinds of wonderful people who contribute even more. Folks like Paul McConaughey, Chris Lott, Bob Johnson, Corey S., Matthew P. Henry. We're really grateful to everyone on Patreon who supports us. There's more than 110. Join them if you can. Go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander. So that's who supports us. That's how the technology works. That's what we want to accomplish. Now I get to introduce our week's guest. And I have to say, this is in many ways a daunting task because Stephen Downes is a legendary figure in education and technology. He's been writing and inventing and talking and meeting with people since the 1990s. He's been a key player in everything from the rise of MOOCs to inventing new RSS tools to trying to push our conceptions, our philosophy, our practical applications of technology. He runs one of the greatest ed tech resources of all time, OL Daily. And everything we've talked about since we launched the Future Trends Forum nearly 4 years ago, every week's topic Stephen has been thinking and writing and working about. So I kind of feel like he's a great mirror to hold up to everything we've accomplished and everything we do in the Future Trends Forum. So if that's not enough to pump him up, I have to say he's
Okay, I appear to be on the stage while Brian is connecting. And this happens sometimes because Brian has poor internet. Don't tell him I said that. But anyhow, I'm assuming you can hear me because I can hear me. And anything I can hear, you can hear. So I'll carry it while we're waiting for Brian to reconnect. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Downes. I'm not sure if there's any way of you telling me whether you can hear me. I'll open up the chat. Oh, you do hear me. Excellent. So first of all, while we're waiting for Brian, I'll put in the obligatory Go Raptors Go and a little Go Blue Jays Go too, because it's been a tough year and they could use the encouragement. Brian's first question is always, what have you been working on lately? Oh, yeah, okay. Brian is joining from a hotel. That explains everything. So Brian's first question, so what have you been working on lately, Stephen? Okay, that's a good question, Brian. I wasn't expecting you to ask me that. Brian's on his phone, which might be better internet. Yes, we got a view of his ceiling or his desk or something. So I'll just pick up, or unless we can actually...
Let's test. Can you hear me?
I do hear you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen, for picking up where my hotel dropped off. Welcome, everyone. So what are you working
on? So I've been following up, I guess. I mean, my mind is scattered across a bunch of different things as always, but I'm sort of focusing the last year or so on the topics that we covered in the e-learning 3.0 course in the fall. This was motivated by me just almost coincidentally, looking into blockchain technologies a bit more seriously. Now, I have zero interest in financial tech. Zero. None. Less than none. I have no Bitcoins, no Ethereum, no Ripple, none of that. Um, and and I'm a healthy skeptic when it comes to the blockchain will change everything school of thought. But uh, it's set in me a bunch of thoughts in motion, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff behind blockchain. Blockchain is just one instance of what they call distributed ledger technology. And talk about and distributed ledger technology brings together a few things. Hash cryptography is one of them. Consensus mechanisms is another one of them. And then you take that and you combine it with some of the long-standing threads that I've been interested in with respect to online learning, things like content syndication, open educational resources, student autonomy, learning through creativity, and all of that. And you get what I've been calling e-learning 3.0. And I think, I think we get a different picture of learning, a picture of learning where, it's not about the content. It's not about textbooks, etc. And even things like documents, document licensing, all of these things are changed. So I grouped that under 9 headings, which I won't run through the list. But basically, there's 3 enabling technologies. There's 3 pedagogies or applications, if you will, and then there's 3 implications or ways in which this shapes learning in the longer term. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
Well, let me. Okay, first of all, thank you again for correctly anticipating my first question, and thank you for outlining what you're thinking about. Let me just walk back to ask about a few of these points along the way. First of all, what were some of the other technologies under the header of distributed ledger other than blockchain that you mentioned?
So let's take hash cryptography. This is used less in blockchain and more in some other things to create what we call content addressing. Content-based addressing. Right now, when we access a resource on the internet, we access it based on where it's located, what its IP address is, right? And that means everybody goes to this IP address. So it's a centralized, really when you think about it, it's kind of a centralized approach. Everybody goes to the same URL. And content-based addressing works differently. The address of the resource is based on the contents, which the name implies. And the way this works is you take the contents, whatever it is, and you run it through a cryptographic algorithm, sometimes called a hashing algorithm. And what you get as output from that algorithm is a string of numbers and letters, of characters, of varying lengths, depending on the algorithm. So a good hashing algorithm will give you a string 256 characters long, say. Okay, so take any piece of content, you produce this 256 character string. That string changes depending on the content. If you take War and Peace, run it through the algorithm, you get that string. Change a comma in War and Peace, run it through that algorithm, you get a different string. Right? So now...
So you need hash for every item of content.
Pardon? I'm sorry?
A unique hash for every item of content.
Yeah, if the hash is long enough. If it's not long enough, you'll get some duplicates, right? But if it's long enough, and 256 bytes is pretty long. That'll certainly do the trick. So that one. So now, okay, I can say I want not the resource located at this location, but the resource identified by this hash.
Wow.
So, okay,
Wow. So the hash is like a
yeah,
URI.
the hash is like a URI.
Wow.
So, so where is the location then? Right? Where is the resource? Well, you have the way this works is you have a network of connected individuals.
Mm-hmm.
One person, a billion people, whatever. Well, maybe a
Mm-hmm.
billion. It doesn't matter, right? And there's different network topologies, um, different
Mm-hmm.
criteria for membership, etc. Right? And so you send a request to the closest person to you on that network, however closeness is defined. You say, I would like the resource identified by this hash. And either that person has that resource and sends it to you, or they don't, and they forward your request to the next people in the network. And your request, as they say, propagates until somebody has the resource and they send it to you. So
Interesting.
now think this through, right? That resource now no longer needs to be located in one particular place. So if one server goes down,
Wow.
doesn't matter. It might be elsewhere in the network. And in fact, at any given time, there might be 1, 2, 10, 100, 1,000 copies of this resource in that network. So you can actually get it from the closest possible source.
It sounds like
BitTorrent is built on this technology. BitTorrent will take a file, break it into pieces, construct what they call a Merkle tree, which is a tree made up of these hash addresses so that everything's organized, send all the different pieces out, and then when you ask for something from BitTorrent, you're asking the network for that piece that's as close as possible to you. Uh, Another system that uses this kind of technology is something that you've all heard of, GitHub. GitHub is
Mm.
made up of Merkle trees. So, like, who knew? Well, they did, but
So
but I
clearly,
so um, so there are some other efforts. There's something called the Interplanetary File Network, and,
ah, yeah.
right? Or Interplanetary File System (IPFS), right? Which you may have heard of. That's what it uses is content-based addressing. Now, it's agonizingly slow because there
Is it
aren't enough people on it yet.
is it slower than Tor?
It's slower than everything.
Mm.
I don't know if it's slower than Tor. I haven't been on Tor for a long time. I work in a government office,
I,
just over there. We have the Canadian Communication Security Establishment. So I don't whip out Tor in the office.
in the street, and say hi to Tor.
Yeah.
So it's slow, but it's very, very interesting. Uh,
Yeah, and it will be faster. I mean, BitTorrent is acceptable now, for example, um, and with if the stuff that they were distributing were more legal, would probably be even more acceptable.
mm,
Uh, there are elements of this kind of technology, not exactly like this, but elements of this in Skype. Right, in Skype, your call isn't routed through a central big Skype central, but it goes through the peers on the Skype network, which is why when you're not using Skype, you should shut it down because Skype's always doing stuff in the background. Um,
well,
sorry.
speaking of stuff in the background, it's okay. Good advice. We have a question that has just come up
Okay.
from Charles Finley, who wants to know what about self-organizing, autonomously organized learning contracts? And he
So
put contracts in quotes to which I think was good.
yeah, yeah, because contracts are you can put contracts into a blockchain such as Ethereum, and there's a self-organizing enterprise called the DAO, which runs on
Mhm.
Ethereum, which is basically these contracts. Um, so the answer to that is yes, that could be done. The question that follows from the answer, though, is what would that accomplish? And that's the harder question, right?
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, we have things like learning contracts, properly so called, that people used to create and maybe still create, and it was sort of the pseudo autonomous learning thing, where you'd quote unquote negotiate a contract with your teacher who has all the power. So, but could do that. But what would the point be, right? But any place where you need to reach an agreement, you could have something similar to a blockchain-based contract. Now, there may have been more intended in the question than I'm picking up on. I certainly allow for that possibility. So, if so, there should be a follow-up.
There should absolutely be a follow-up if you'd like. Charles, please follow up as you like. By the way, if you're new to the forum technology, that's an example of one of those questions that were asked.
Mhm.
So you can see I could just flash it on the screen. I could bring it back and read it out loud. This is just let you know that that's the opening of the dam. So people will now ask questions, especially as you keep running through. Let me preempt them with one quick question along the way. Earlier, you were describing what you called e-learning 3.0.
Yeah.
And is that defined by the combination of content syndication and OER, or are there more items that are part of that?
It's more, how would I want to put it? E-learning 1.0 is the client service model, client server model, learning management system. We're all familiar with that. E-learning 2.0, which is a name I coined back in 2004, is this whole idea of content syndication, social networks, the idea of online services as platforms, students or learners as prosumers. They both produce and consume, right? So that whole Web 2.0 thing. E-learning 3.0, I based that name partially on e-learning 2.0 because I figured I could get away with it. But also out there, there's what they're calling Web 3. Web 3 is characterized by initiatives such as Tim Berners-Lee's SOLID, which stands for Social Linked Data. It's characterized by things like the indie web, domain of one's own, all of these distributed peer-to-peer, almost responses to the platforms, the social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and the rest, who have turned out to be toxic. They're for a bunch of reasons. I won't go down that rabbit hole. So the distributed internet, peer-to-peer, each person owns their own part of the internet. The services are created by the crowd working together rather than by a centralized service provider. All of that's Web 3. So I tried to think of, well, could I call it Learn 3? No. E3? No. So I just went with e-learning 3.0 to characterize that. So, and and there's the different aspects of it. It includes the cloud. It includes the rise of data as opposed to, say, linear content or narrative. It includes the whole ideas of blockchain, Merkle trees, hash graphs, consensus-based systems, decision-making, communities based on consensus, and then what we hope are the outcomes of that, right? Learning experiences, and ultimately individual agency.
It's interesting that through those three stages, you get escalating decentralization, from the client server through content syndication through peer-to-peer. Would Mastodon be a good example of non-educational technology that could be used for teaching and learning under your 3.0 header?
So It's like 2.5.
Okay.
So Mastodon is what they call a federation or a federated system.
Right.
Sometimes they refer to it as part of the Fediverse, and it runs on a protocol called ActivityPub. And what makes it only 2.5 rather than 3 is that instead of each person owning their own individual instance of Mastodon, you have individual Mastodon servers. Might be
I see.
100, might be 1,000, whatever. And then with each server, there might be 110, 1,000, 10,000 members. So the servers are connected to each other, but the members are not directly connected to each other. They only connect via these servers. So that's what makes it a federation. It's more distributed than the platforms, right? The platform, there's just one central thing.
But it's
Mastodon,
still a platform.
yeah, but it's still a platform.
I
So
see.
2.5.
A
And
transition stage.
yeah, and I agonize over the question is 2.5 good enough, right? I mean, in theory, everybody could have their own Mastodon.
Right.
Uh, I've looked at, although I haven't actually put my hands to the task of implementing it, but I think your own personal learning application could support ActivityPub, and if it supports ActivityPub, then it could support an even more decentralized version of what Mastodon is doing. Do we need to go that far? Can we make that work? Does it descend into utter confusion? I don't know yet.
Before we get to utter confusion, we have another question that's come up from Jeff, and let me just bring this up.
Okay.
This is about you. This is he's interested in hearing about Grasshopper. Personal learning environment sounds like something that will happen as learning leaves institutions and becomes more of an a la carte experience for people.
Yeah. That's the long game, right? Um,
Mm,
I've
mm,
been developing Grasshopper for years. I think of it as more of my own research lab.
mm,
I'm not entrepreneurially minded, really, um, which is why I don't own a company and I haven't had an IPO and why I still owe lots of money on my house. So I haven't been so worried about releasing Grasshopper as a commercial product, but I am interested in what can be done with it. It is intended to be a personal learning environment, although partway along, we discovered quite by accident that it was also an ideal platform for hosting a connectivist style MOOC. So I actually have kind of two streams of Grasshopper working simultaneously, same code
mm,
base, different data structure.
mm,
One for offering MOOCs, the other as a personal learning environment.
mm.
Uh,
Very different.
yeah, now my problem, of course, is I'm old, which means that when I started cutting edge development, I learned Perl and CGI scripting. I know
Yeah.
that really well, but the internet has moved on. And like 1% of all developers use Perl. So anything I do with Grasshopper, I have to build from scratch for myself, pretty much, which means, all the application programming interfaces so that I can make it do neat things like, say, connect with ActivityPub. So
Mm,
one of the things I'm doing over the last 6 months or so, I've been really focusing hard on JavaScript and especially Node.js,
wow.
uh, and then some of the packages or frameworks that work with Node, such as Electron for desktop applications,
Mm,
Express for content management type applications, and also how it interfaces with different databases, how you run it on the cloud. I've been really working hard on that. I don't have anything really to release on that yet because I've been learning it. Uh, yeah, 60 years old and I have to start all over learning technology again. My life is an example of the stuff that we talk about.
ideally, ideally,
Dang
it's one of the many reasons you're so impressive. Not to mention, you're able to move rapidly between the philosophy of epistemology and the details of JavaScript. Um, thank you
Yeah,
for
we haven't
the.
touched the epistemology yet, but yeah.
Uh,
So anyhow, Grasshopper ideally is a personal learning environment. And if I had to summarize its functions, and I have, it's aggregate, remix, repurpose, feed forward. And that's what it's designed to do. That's also what a CMOOC is. And I'm working on it, but I want it to be JavaScript.
Well, Jeff, you asked the deep question, and you got a great answer. We have a couple more questions. They're just piling in right now, Stephen. You've just unleashed the mob. This is great. And let's see if we can bring up wonderful longtime supporter and friend of the program, Roxanne Riskin. She has a question. Let's see if we can bring her up on stage to join us. And while that's going on, let's see. Yes, excellent. Hello, Roxanne. Give a second here.
A little bit about your connectivism philosophy, and I find that, let me just preface it by saying I heard 60 is the new 40.
Oh, good.
Connectivism is what we're looking at now not to replace constructivism.
Mm-hmm. So, okay.
Question. That's not my question. My question is on that may be question 2. My question is on your thoughts on OER and how that connects with your Web3 ideas, and what is the importance of bringing that into higher ed for our faculty, students, and the institutions at large that should look more into blockchains, and, as you described, looking at the GitHub type of experiences to connect our content.
Yeah, great question. GitHub is a wonderful application that is horrendously documented. It's awful. Yeah. What I've been doing over the last 2 weeks, in fact, is a deep dive into GitHub so that I understand it inside and out cold, because it has stymied me for years. Because I mean, you read through the documentation, they're talking about one thing, and then they change the terminology partway through. They're still talking about the same thing, but anyhow. So I'm working on something that's like a super simple for everybody introduction to GitHub.
Nice.
So that would be, to answer Roxanne's question, the starting point. Open educational resources and the whole concept of open educational resources, the way that's developed over the years, has been very frustrating to me, because it's basically being enclosed and commercialized. And just like MOOCs, right? It sounds like a great idea. Company starts up, then they get venture capitalist funding, and they find that, well, we had planned to do it open, but really no. And a lot of that happens to open educational resources. And for years, I've been warning about this. In fact, I have a presentation from, I believe it's 2001, that I did to the Open Education Conference in Logan, Utah, talking about enclosure of resources, or how they'll use technology standards like metadata to make it impossible for non-commercial providers to create resources, etc. And now we're seeing it. And licensing. You want to get going with open educational resources. You're going to get involved into these deep, arcane, pointless discussions about licensing. And I understand why Creative Commons was invented, but to me, it entrenched the idea that everything has to be licensed as though it were a commercial product, even if it isn't, right? We all have to buy into this kind of way of looking at the world. Licensing destroys sharing, right? Because you're not sharing anymore. You're treating it as this commodity valued at $0. So I get very frustrated by all of that. Sustainability, big issue for open educational resources
Yeah.
because, uh, not only do you have to pay publishers to produce them, right, or pay professors or whatever, so they can be expensive to produce. Then you have hosting, updating, editing, quality control, all of that, which doesn't really work on centralized servers. Merlot has tried. There's something called I've forgotten what it's called. It was a OER assessment protocol.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, and I've come up with a concept that I call content addressable resources for education, CARE, or CARE. Um,
Oh.
you see where I'm going with that? So instead of worrying about all of what I've just talked about, if you create something that you want to share for the world of education, you give it a content-based address and you throw it into one of these uh, networks like IPFS or even like GitHub. I'm not sure how well it would work with GitHub or more generically Git. I think GitLab rather than GitHub might be our way to go here, but something like that, right? So the idea is you make it, you throw it into one of these networks. Other people now everybody has access to it,
Right.
and nobody can enclose it. Nobody can commercialize it, or if they do, it's sort of pointless because it's in there in that network. You can't hide it, right? And that network becomes the go-to place to get all of these things. So you don't need to worry about is it indexed by Scopus? Is it considered a Creative Commons license or some other licenses? Oh, if it's in the network, you can use it. Just like if it's in GitHub, you can clone it, right? And you don't worry about the licensing in that because none of this is a commercial enterprise, anyways. So uh, if we get the structure of all of this right, when the resources go into the network, they can be digitally signed. So basically, you take your personal signature, whatever that is, and hash it, and the resource and hash it, and then you take the two hashes and hash them together, and now you have a signed resource. Of course, you can hash hashes. Why not?
I don't know.
Right?
I'm just thinking about the crypto of this. This is great.
Yeah, right. So now your signed resource has gone in there, and then we can actually create trees of different versions of the resource. We can split them off and have what they call forking of the resource for localization, whatever. Um, so we can have what I call basically CareNet. CareNet is this entire network of resources. And the point here is the users of CareNet are the creators in CareNet. Everybody creates, everybody uses. There isn't this artificial distinction between publisher and reader, right? If it's useful, people will use it. If it's not useful, people won't use it. And ultimately, that the mechanism that decides. And then for things like MOOCs, etc., we can create what I call care packages.
Ah.
Right. And so,
Very good.
you have resource, and they might be arranged in a linear fashion, or as I would prefer, you set them up just as a set of associated objects, the way Grasshopper does. Like Grasshopper doesn't organize content in a linear fashion. Grasshopper, behind the scenes, organizes everything as a graph. So when you access, say, the eLearning 3.0 course, it looks like a course, but that's just one way of looking at the data in Grasshopper. And there's all kinds of different ways of looking at the data in Grasshopper because it's a graph. So a course is just one perspective on that data. So you create these packages, and so it creates reusability. If you need to localize, you just localize, and then that you just updated your own version of the package.
This is a
So-
whole peer-to-peer hashed world without addresses and without licenses.
And the thing to make this work is an easy interface, right? We need a blogger, a care blogger.
Right.
I don't even have a good word for it yet.
Yeah,
A care something, right? So that people can easily contribute and read and use. So right now, something like Grasshopper seems to me to be the surface level for that. But a caretaker, says Rod.
Oh, no.
Caretaker, I love that.
The caring
Well,
community.
The caring community. And you know what's going to happen is
Caring commons. Right.
somebody who fights really hard for these is going to be a Care Bear.
That's the
Roxanne, thank you so much. That was a great question, and Stephen, you took this in a brilliant direction.
David. I'm looking forward to this developing more in the next decade.
Yeah, and just one word for the community. Don't depend on me to write all the code for this, please. Because I'm not a good enough programmer to do that. So, I mean, these ideas are, for the community to develop. And I can write some prototypes and things like that and try to express it, but real programmers are going to have to do this.
Well, we have some in the audience, and the word goes out.
And now
thank you.
Very careful. No, I didn't.
We have another question. That we have a whole bunch of questions, and thank you, Roxanne. I want to bring this one
Okay,
up.
I'll keep my answers shorter then, because if we have a bunch, I'd like to cover as many as I can.
Roxanne is a genius for great questions. And speaking of geniuses for great questions, Mark Corbett Wilson, another longtime friend and supporter of the program, has this deep question that goes at politics. With the educated people taking over fire, medicine, transportation, agricultural, government, education, and running those sectors into the ground, how do you view higher education? And for everyone, fire refers to finance, insurance, those fields.
Oh, I thought he was referring to firefighting, which is ironically what you do want to run. Never mind. Yeah, I mean, I guess the last thing we want to do is leave education to the domain of the educated. That was a quip, not a real sentiment.
All right.
Yeah, that's a hard question because, and I've been reading about this and writing a little bit about this. The dominant paradigm that we have right now for governance is evidence, logic, reason, etc. Now, a lot of people think that's also how human beings think, is with those things. I think there's a lot of evidence that we don't actually think using those things, that those things are artifacts that we produce largely to communicate with each other and often to justify what it is we actually did use in order to think. And one of the criticisms, and it was raised by John Ralston Saul, and I cited this just recently in something, so it's at the top of my mind, is that logic, reason, etc., they're in a very certain sense empty, right? They are systems of zero value. So if you use, for example, mathematics and finance to regulate your economy, right? It's a good tool. It's a great tool for that. But it means your economy is being regulated by a mechanism that instantiates no values at all. That's a problem. That's a problem because we want some things to matter. Things like human life, things like the environment, things like common decency. And these things are not inherent in logic, reason, mathematics, and never have been. So where do these things come from? Well, they come from people. They come from the lived experience of a life. You
Right.
know, just to hand wave a bit. If I wanted to get, uh, you know, a little more detailed, they come from the interoperation of human neurons and other body parts in response to an environment in which some things are good and some things are bad, right? Where good things are things that promote life and bad things are things that don't promote life or end life. Or, you get it, right? And and interestingly, this instantiates differently for every person, uh, which is why you have all kinds of different belief systems and all of that. So logic, reason, mathematics, etc., has been a great mechanism for allowing us to balance out these interests, or at least negotiate these interests. But these mechanisms have become the entire story, right? The economy is the entire story. The language of value, in value in monetary terms, right? People say, what is the value of a life? That phrasing itself is suspect, right? And I've been trying to avoid it. I've been going back to using the Kantian kind of expression of thinking of each life as an end in itself or a good in itself rather than as a means. Yeah. So that's what the educated and the reasoned have done to our society, to go back to the original question, right? So how do you fix that? I think decentralization is a big part of it. I think that you have to address it structurally. You can't address it through policy mechanisms. You have to set it up structurally so that, to as much of a degree as possible, the importance of each person in a society is recognized to as great an extent as possible. So, in economic terms, that would mean reducing inequity, right? In power theory, or whatever they want to call it, terms, that would mean reducing imbalances in power in terms of agency. That means improving agency, right? And then, so what are the mechanisms to do that? And there's a whole range of things that we have to do, but ultimately, I think it's structural. You can't tell people, it's not a semantic thing, right? You can't tell people you should do such and such, right? Because they won't. And there's it's like telling somebody, you cannot believe a contradiction. Well, there's currently an American president who's proving that that's not true. You can believe a contradiction.
Lots of people can. That's easy. It sounds like what you're describing is a failed technocracy, and what you're suggesting is something, depending on how decentralized you want to get, something like anarchist socialism.
Well, yes and no. The way it came out in the course, which might not be the final way it comes out, is
I'm sorry, which course?
The e-learning 3.0 course. Okay. This is also stuff that I've been thinking about, right? It came out in the course thinking of community as consensus. Now, what is consensus? Now, we can talk about the different stories, but consensus is something that we can get a handle on. I've been arguing for a long time against the idea of community as sameness, of community as counting. There was a thing back in, I think it was 2004, and I came out with this thing called groups versus networks. It's a kind of badly chosen thing, but groups was this idea of community based on sameness, where you make the decisions by counting things. What matters is, we're all in this together. Everybody marches to the same. There's a whole bunch of things, right? The other side of that is community based on well, I said networks, and networks still is, right? Community based on networks, qua graphs, qua consensus, right? And the decision-making mechanisms are very different. In things like blockchain, they face what they call the Byzantine generals problem, where you have a world in which you don't have commonly accepted standards of what's true, what's real, what's valuable, etc. And yet you still need to make decisions. You still need to carry the blockchain forward. It's kind of ironic that all of this comes out of the financial community. And so there are different ways in which you set up your consensus-based network in order to establish that. Bitcoin used something that was called proof of work. And ultimately what it boiled down to is whoever did the most work, whoever spends the most money, they get to decide. It was elegant. It was elegant because it showed that there could be a non-arbitrary mechanism to establish consensus in a graph or a network. And that was a breakthrough. That was a genuine breakthrough. Doesn't mean we all want to go do proof of work because it's expensive, it's messy, it's not really fair, and right now most of the small number of what they call miners are actually running the network. That's not what we had in mind at all.
Well, we can't tell because we still don't know who invented Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know, which is kind of so. And again, does consensus go hand in hand with anonymity? Tough question, right? But a structural question, right? It's so there are other methods for establishing consensus. Something like that is what we're going to have to do, because ultimately, with 7 billion people, you cannot have a reasoned argument and reach a common conclusion. Will not happen. Will never happen. People's experiences, their backgrounds, their beliefs are too different because we're all different people, right? And we can't leave it to empty technocratic solutions that do not take value into account at all. So we have to mix these two. We have to have the human and we have to have the structural in such a way that the human determines the outcome of the structural.
So you're a humanist at last. Before I go down this road, before I dive into that or I talk about the Pirate Party, I wanted to bring up a question from Majid Ali, who asked this really, really good question. Before we run out of time, he wants to know your opinion on the future of learning analytics in higher education. And it's a great question. We have a sense of this from your description of your CARE project as one view.
So right now, learning analytics is set up in order to benefit the producer. It's a lot like advertising analytics, right? Which is set up in order to benefit the advertiser. So we have things like predictive analytics, which tell whether somebody is going to fail the course by what they're doing, for example, or adaptive courses that make recommendations for things. It's Netflix on steroids, right? Except it's not even as strong as Netflix. I don't see a long-term future in that because I don't see a long-term future in educational systems that don't work to benefit the people being educated. So I think where analytics will come into the fore, and this is in the nearer probably than the longer term future, is in personal data or personal learning analytics. And we're seeing this already on this thing here. For example, I have an application, I won't go through it, called Strava. Strava records my bicycle rides. It lets me share my bicycle rides with friends. It gives me feedback on what my speed was, etc. If I connected it to my wrist, it'd give me heart rate and all of that. Great little learning application. I cycle a lot more because of things like that than I used to in the past. Lovely stuff. I have a CPAP machine at home. My CPAP machine, I've had one for a long time, 15, almost 20 years now,
Yeah, me too.
because, you know, I have chronic sleep apnea. What can I do?
No, CPAPs are
Uh,
great.
CPAPs are great. CPAPs have given me 10 to 20 extra years of productive life. So thank you, inventors of CPAPs.
Yeah.
Got a new one recently. It comes with an application called My Air. And My
Mhm.
Air it's on my phone. It's teaching me how to use my CPAP. My CPAP detects all kinds of things about my sleep and my breathing, etc. It tells me I should be adjusting my mask because it's not working right, etc. It teaches me how to use this thing. That's personal data analytics. That's the future of learning analytics.
Good answer. Majed, excuse me if I mispronounce you. Thank you. That's a terrific question. Yeah, there's a lot you could do with that, both informal learning as well as formal learning. Stephen, we are just about out of time,
Yeah, I'm
um,
sorry.
which
I
is
tried
no,
to
no,
be
no,
short.
no, don't apologize. This is fantastic. We have to have you back. Just so that we can keep going. And people have been emailing me more questions saying, we got to ask Stephen about this, we got to ask Stephen about that. Lots of good stuff. I want to wrap things up. I want to ask a couple of questions. One is to follow up with your work on Grasshopper. Where should people go? What should people do?
Oh my goodness. The first thing, I guess, is to subscribe to my newsletter, OL Daily, because
Everyone
any
should do
change,
that.
anything I do to Grasshopper, it'll eventually come out in that newsletter. Uh, I will be offering another version of eLearning 3.0 sometime this fall,
Oh, great.
because people are complaining that the first one went away. And it's nice because I have all the videos in that I did for the last one, so it'll be easier.
Helps.
Except
That
I'll
helps.
make more resources. So that's probably what to do. Follow the newsletter, watch for the course.
And I have to tell everybody to follow OL Daily. That's just one of the great resources on earth for education technology. We had a couple of people that had follow-up questions that we're really out of time for. I just want to mention these up here. Charles Finley wanted to know if, so don't answer this yet. I just want to put this up here on the table, that self-organizing autonomous organizations could create a different type of organization of learning. And we had someone wanted to know what you thought about AI.
God.
And
The answer to that one is yes.
okay.
AI assisted design, learning object or open educational resources that author themselves using AI, definitely coming.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I keep telling people this, and they think that I've gone too far. But we have gone too far today. Stephen, the best way I would recommend people to follow you is through the OL Daily newsletter. You're also pretty active on Twitter. You also write a lot. Are these the just grab you in every possible way, I think is the advice. Is there any other way people should follow you, or any?
So on Twitter, you can either follow me at OL Daily or at Downs. The OL Daily is just the newsletter in Twitter form. Downs is pictures and opinions and weird stuff. I have a blog called Half an Hour. I have another blog that's on Blogger. I have a WordPress blog for political issues called Leftish, Leftish. I'm active on Mastodon, Downs at mastodon.social. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook or any Facebook product. Do not look for me on Facebook because values matter.
So we've got. I will hit a tweet about this so that everyone can see these links. In the meantime, Stephen, I'm quite serious. I'm going to follow up for two things. One is to compare notes about CPAPs, and the second is to figure out how to get you back here. Talking with you is like having the best seminar in education and technology. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Well, we will invite you. We will. Thank you. But don't go away, friends, because we have to talk about what we're doing next. And we just make sure that everybody gets a chance to see where we're going. So next week, we're changing ground to have the awesome Dorothy Kim, who is a medieval historian who has spent a lot of time researching and tangling with the alt-right when trying to do medieval history online. So let's see how she sees us doing digital humanities and digital academic work in general in the age of Gamergate, 4chan, and online trolling. Now, our book club has just come, this current reading has just come to an end. We have finished The Stupendous Age of Surveillance Capitalism. We've had a bunch of great conversations, a lot of discussion. The book is very, very powerful, one of the great books of our time. And please take a look over our notes. If you haven't had a chance to read it, the notes will be there so you can check them at your leisure. But I'd like just to get you to think about what you want to read next. Now, if you'd like to get a copy of that book, you can get it from our bookstore along with other books on the future of education. And if you want to keep talking about everything from care packages to surveillance capitalism, we have many, many places for doing so. So on Twitter, just use the hashtag FTTE, join one of our groups on Slack, LinkedIn, or Facebook, tweet us in different ways. In the meantime, thank you all for the really good questions. Thanks to Stephen for really good answers. We'll see you online, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.